For this Adobe Illustrator demonstration, I'm going to be working with the pen tool located here in your tools panel. Working with the pen tool can be rather daunting if you've never worked with it before, so I suggest you start slowly. Just start marking up the artboard, clicking and dragging and beginning to see how the pen tool behaves. I remember that it took me quite a while to get used to it when I first started. We'll be making anchor points and paths and talking about the various pen tool options and behaviors that are available, and also the difference between an open and a closed path. So I've got this new nice clean artboard, and I'm going to select my pen tool and begin marking. I can click and it'll just make a simple point if I click once. If I hold the Shift key down and click again, I can constrain what I just made to a straight line. I could also click and drag, and I have now created a curved line. You can see that Bezier curve is indicated, and you can see the anchor points that are showing. The anchor points are indicated by the little white squares, and then the filled in blue square is the current point that's selected, and we know that this current point that's selected is creating a curve because it has these two handles on either end. And if I click and drag the handles back and forth, I can manipulate the curve created by this point, which is different from this point. If I click on this point to select it with my direct selection tool, I can see that it does not have the handles, and that indicates to me that it is not a curved point. The other interesting thing is if I still have the pen tool selected and I hover over these points, notice how the cursor changes to the pen tool with a little minus sign next to it. That indicates to me that I could actually click on this once and remove that point. Now that didn't happen. Why is that? What happens if I click over here? It removed that one. Why did that not occur? The difference is this one was our original point or our origin point, and the one over here was in between the other two that we had made. So I was able to hover over that one, click, and remove it. Another interesting thing is as I hover over a point and my cursor changes to the little convert anchor point tool, that means that I could click and drag and convert it and make this actually into a point that could be curved. So having the pen tool and hovering over lines as you work, you can see that it changes characteristics. And these are pen tool behaviors. If I wanted to add an additional point to this line, if I hover over the line and I see that little plus sign that the pen tool is giving me, and I click on that line, I was able to actually add an additional point that I can click and drag and manipulate, pulling on the handles. So when you first start drawing with the pen tool, it takes a little bit of time to get used to it. I remember when I first started clicking and then clicking and dragging, I never knew which direction I was going to go at first, and then I ended up over dragging and creating too much of a curve. I remember that happened quite often because I wasn't used to the behavior that's available. So it does take some time to develop a touch with the pen tool and get used to the cursor and mouse relationship and the sensitivity of the pen tool on your individual Illustrator program in relation to the sensitivity that you have set up with either your mouse or your tablet. And of course, I can change and convert points. I could click on this and now convert it to just a very basic, or I can remove or I can add more points. So just hovering over lines with the pen tool allows me to do a few things. And then if I want to make specific adjustments to these points, I can click on them using my direct selection tool and click and drag. Now both of these paths on the artboard are what we consider open paths, and that is because they did not start at an origin point and finish at the same point of origin. For example, let me delete some of these items on the artboard. So here's our open path. Now I'm going to create a closed path. So I'm just going to click and drag on the artboard as I move around. This is still an open path. And then when I get to the origin point and I hover over that origin point, do you see how the cursor changes to having a little O or a little 0? That means that's the 0 point or the point of origin. If I click again on this point, that closes the path. So this is a closed path and an open path. And the only difference is this has been completed by clicking on the point of origin. Now you can actually combine closed and open paths, certainly, to create compound paths. So let's say I have an additional path here, and I'm going to take the fill out of that path so you can see where it is on top of this one. And now if I select by holding the Shift key down both of these paths, I could combine them using my Pathfinder panel. We'll bring that up under Window and Pathfinder. And I can, create something with these. Maybe I want to actually divide the original item, and I can do that using this Pathfinder. So you can use open paths and closed paths for making these compound paths. They can be used together. So in another demonstration, we're going to go over working with the Pathfinder and making more complex compound paths on the artboard. Now, under the pen tool, you have also different types of tools that you can select. I can be in add anchor point mode at all times, meaning that no matter where I click, it constrains the pen tool to this add mode. So I can simply add more points to an object on the stage when I'm in add anchor point mode. If I go similarly to delete anchor point mode, it constrains my pen tool to a mode where if I hover over anchor points, now I'm in delete. Now sometimes when you click on the path and not specifically a point, this little dialog box will pop up and says please use delete anchor point tool on an anchor point of a path. So apparently I didn't hover specifically on a point. I had hovered over the path. See, if I hover over the path, that doesn't work. But if I hover over an anchor point, I can remove it. So that's constraining the pen to delete anchor point. Or you can, let's say, for example, I have a rectangle on the artboard, and I want to convert each of those corner points to, I wanted these little corner anchor points to be smoothed out. If I constrain the pen tool to convert anchor point tool, now when I click over this point and drag, I am able to smooth out these corner points. And it does take a little getting used to. Sometimes you end up clicking and dragging and oh, that's not exactly what I want to do. So then you have to rotate those handles to get the effect that you're going for. But it's really easy to get off kilter and not doing exactly what you want to do. So at this point, when you're just getting used to and getting introduced to the pen tool, it's a good idea to just practice clicking and dragging and putting points on the artboard and getting used to the behaviors of the pen tool. And the more practice, the more skilled you become at working with this very touchy but powerful tool. This tool can be used for tracing, it can be used for freehand drawing. It's one of the most important tools that Illustrator offers, but can be one of the most frustrating to learn at first. So this concludes your introduction to working with the pen tool.